This is The Gala Show. I'm your reporter on the beat, Gala Avery. On this episode, you may know my guest as the host of the podcast Post Mortem, a collaborator of Stephen King, the writer of Hocus Pocus, or even as the director of Critters 2, the main course. But here on The Gala Show, I know him as the nicest guy in Hollywood, Mick Garris. Hi, Mick.
Hi, Gala. It's so great to have you here at Nice Guy Productions World Headquarters.
I know, isn't it? It's funny. I'm actually in where Mick normally sits, and he's in the guest spot.
It feels weird, but kind of nice. It's cushy on the couch.
Yeah, it really is. You have a very nice couch.
Thank you.
Okay, so actually, really weird fact that I found out while I was doing my little research. Are you born on December 4th?
Yes.
So you and I have the same birthday.
We do. And Tony Todd.
Oh, yeah. And Jay-Z.
And Jeff Bridges.
Okay, there's all the people that are born on our beautiful day. But
well,
you're
notables
also,
other than me.
I know. You're also born in Santa Monica?
Yeah, at St. John's Hospital.
I am too.
This is too weird.
That's really weird. I was like, what are the odds he's going to be born at St. John's on December 4th?
Pretty amazing.
That's so weird. So
a few years apart, though.
Just a little, just
Couple
one or
here.
two. Yeah. So before we bring up the topic for today, I have a question for you. I recently did an interview for the Fangoria archives where I got to pick 3 of my favorite covers from Fangoria. And of course, I had to pick the Critters 2 cover. It was I picked a movie I had seen from because of video archives, or a movie I had seen before because of, and then during.
Right.
And that Critters was the one I saw during because you interviewed my dad. And I love Critters. Honestly, my friends are kind of annoyed with how much I love Critters.
Nobody's going to be annoyed here.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But inside the Fangoria article magazine, there was this really interesting article where apparently he came to set. And he was not happy to be on set. Do you remember him coming?
Who coming to set?
One of the Fangoria guys. Apparently he came to set. And it was he was talking about he was in Santa Clarita. Do you remember that?
I don't remember anything. Was it Taylor White?
It might have been. I can't remember.
Might have been Taylor White. I actually made him an extra in the movie.
Oh, did you?
He had a great time.
Did he?
So,
he was so curmudgeonly in the Fangoria.
Really?
He was I'm out here in Santa Clarita. It's wet and it's cold.
Well, it was the coldest day in 100 years. The whole
Really?
coldest period of time in 100 years while we were shooting there.
Wow, that's great. In 100 years, and it hasn't gotten colder since.
Oh, well, I'm sure it's only gotten warmer like everywhere else.
Everywhere. Or there's a hurricane happening.
Or
Who
there's
knows?
a hurricane. I haven't seen the Santa Clarita hurricane yet, but
No, but one day. It's coming.
One day soon. And now it's time for a commercial break. And we are back.
So, as always, my guest gets to bring their topic to the mic. Mick, why don't you tell us what your topic is and why you decided to choose it?
Well, I think a really interesting point of conversation is books and the source material they're based on and how they are very different from one another because they're totally different media. But a very profound but really obvious thing that the author and screenwriter Richard Matheson told me when we were working on Amazing Stories together, he said, books are internal and film is external.
Oh, that's a good point.
Well, it's duh, but it is really profound.
Duh. No, I like that because I hadn't thought of that before, actually.
But it's really true. And one of the challenges of a filmmaker who's adapting a literary source material is how you externalize what is internal. And I've been faced with that many times, adapting Stephen King and Clive Barker and Steve Martini and various other authors, including myself. And I just think it's a fascinating topic that people don't often talk about.
I agree, and I cannot wait to dig into it today. So that is our topic for today, the difference between movies and their original literary source material. 30 minutes on the clock, and our time starts now.
Whoa, okay.
I know. I got a little timer for you and everything.
Yeah, having worked with Stephen King so much, it's really fascinating to see the way he works because 3 of the projects that I worked on, that I directed, he actually wrote the screenplays himself.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite genres actually in movies, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. But authors who adapt their own source material, I mean, like Let the Right One In, John Advey Livingston did that. The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty.
Yeah.
Altered States, Patty Chayefsky. Rollerball, even William Harrison. The list goes on and on. So how do you think that affects the process, like when they're adapting their own work?
Well, it's interesting because not all novelists make good screenwriters, because you do have to consider that it's a visual medium, even though it's a verbal medium as well. Not having just two people talking to each other in a room to explain the plot and everything that's going on. But somebody like Stephen King, who writes very cinematically, and he's a brilliant novelist and really knows his prose and knows when and where to be expansive with his prose. But he is able to, it's amazing to take like a 1,300-page novel like The Stand and turn it into a 460-page screenplay for the miniseries that we did. But writing fiction and prose is very much, like Richard Matheson said, something that's internal. You're talking more about the thoughts and machinations behind the actions rather than the actions themselves, depending on the book, of course. A lot of, pulp fiction, if I may borrow the term, is very much about action and reaction and explosives and kineticism, whereas I would say the preponderance of literature, at least half of every book, is internal. And so King's stuff, in particular The Shining, is a very internal novel about the unraveling into madness by Jack Torrance. And it was in his hands to turn that into a screenplay because famously he did not like Kubrick's film.
Yes.
And mainly because the book is really personal to him. And for Kubrick, it was a movie.
Yeah.
And it was a movie to tell. And King, I've said this many times, but King is very warm. And Kubrick is very cool and detached.
Yeah, he's very particular. He's very methodical and
schematic.
Schematic. Yeah. I would agree with that. He's very exact in and it can almost be a little sterile sometimes.
Yeah. And it's not really about, Jack Nicholson is crazy from the get-go and gets crazier. Whereas in King's novel and his screenplay and in the miniseries we made together, you take a sane man who is feeling the guilt of having committed terrible violence against his young boy, broken his arm in a drunken rage because he couldn't control his intake of alcohol. That's something really personal to Stephen King.
Yeah.
I don't know that he ever hurt one of his sons or
was
his daughter,
hurt by someone.
Or was hurt by someone, but he knew what the tightrope you walk is when you can't control your relationship with the bottle.
Yeah.
So he was hurt by the rejection of what the most important elements to his novel were.
Yeah, because, my dad always tells this story that actually Kubrick and John Milius, and I think he told it on your podcast about when Kubrick bought a gun from John Milius,
right.
And then he called him back and he's like, he completely changed the gun. It's like, no, I made it better. And that's how Kubrick sees an adaptation, is that you have to completely dismantle it and then put it back together with yourself involved. Whereas King, with The Shining, I'm guessing specifically, it was very personal to him, so he didn't want someone to take it apart and then put it back together. He wanted it just to be what it was.
But he could turn it into a different medium because
of course.
He knows that medium. But it was an interesting experience making The Stand, which he also adapted himself. Because before that, he didn't have as much respect for screenwriting as he did for novel writing.
Interesting.
And he said that to me during the production of The Stand, is when he developed his respect for the medium of screenwriting being every bit as respectable as the medium of fiction writing. Because he'd been writing, he wrote Sleepwalkers that we did together as an original screenplay, and it's written sort of as a B movie. It's even though we tried to elevate it into something that the dramatic elements were as good as any other movie, it was still him playing in the B-movie world.
Yeah.
You know, it's a monster movie, and it's about sex and feeding off of a virgin's essence.
It's still that B movie, like,
Yeah.
in itself. How did you and King first meet each other?
We first met on Sleepwalkers.
Yeah.
When I was interviewed to direct it. I was a big fan of the genre, a big fan of the works of Stephen King. I knew it really well. I had a great meeting with them at Columbia, and then they hired somebody else.
Oh.
And then that somebody else started rewriting Stephen King's script.
And King did not like that.
King and Columbia did not like that.
Interesting that
because-
Columbia, that's really great that Columbia like backed King. I'm
Well,
guessing.
it's not the most altruistic reason. The reason
Oh.
was you can't call a movie Stephen King's Sleepwalkers if he doesn't like the script.
And if he goes out and says, hey, this was rewritten, this isn't my word, you can't say,
yeah.
can't put my name on it.
He has to agree to put his name on. And so that was the reason Columbia wasn't happy about it.
But then they brought you in and you did the original script, I'm assuming.
We did the original script, but we also made some changes. The studio had some problems and some issues. And I would suggest to King, because I'm a writer-director as well, I would suggest to King that, do you want me to take a crack at the notes they have here? He said, oh, no, let me take a look at it and give it a try. And the next day in the fax machine,
That's how long ago this was.
1992.
Before I was born.
Yes. So there would be a half a dozen pages in the fax machine when I got to the office in the morning, and it was great stuff.
That's great.
There were a couple of things that I wrote that, with his permission, that he really liked, like the scene in the mirror where we see what the coupling mother and son really look like as sleepwalkers was something that was added that I put in, but mostly it's definitely King's vision.
Do you remember any, besides that addition that you just mentioned, do you remember any other things in Sleepwalkers that were like notes that you guys specifically like wrote together to improve it for the studio?
One thing was, nobody ever says where the Sleepwalkers come from. And so I had the idea in the opening titles where we actually give the definition from the Chillicothe Encyclopedia of Arcane Knowledge or something like that, which is not a real book, but we treat it as if it was.
I honestly just thought it was a real book when you mentioned it.
Everybody does.
You said it with such authority that I'm like, wow, I'm going to go to the library and go like find the Sleepwalkers.
Well, it helped explain something in one sentence in the titles that would have taken 2 or 3 scenes to accomplish. And King loved it and then made a few tweaks to it himself. And so that addressed studio notes in an elegant and very quick way that did not require much screen time or diversion from the story we were telling.
Yeah. You've also mentioned that you've worked on material that was like written by Clive Barker.
Yeah.
How is that different than with King?
Well, it's really interesting working with Clive. We've recently written a pilot together. We've done
great.
stuff together before. A lot more of that is in my hands. Clive, as a screenwriter, my experience with Clive is we co-write.
Okay.
And he's the idea man. And he's
It's like my dad called himself.
really?
Yeah.
And so I'm as much a typist as I am a writer when I'm working with Clive.
Yeah.
But he's incredibly open to ideas and revisions and things. We've worked together off and on for 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
And, just really, really good friends. And I know how his mind works, which is a terrible thing. He's got one of the most brutal and yet loving and affectionate minds I know.
I find that people are like that. Like when they are really dark and they create really dark material, they're typically the nicest people.
We get it out.
Yeah. You exercise those demons through your art. And I think people...
Repression is a terrible thing.
Yeah. And I think people also misunderstand that, like, especially also like with rap artists. They're not always gang banging and shooting up things and doing drugs. I remember Snoop Dogg had like a reality show called Fatherhood. I think that's what it was called.
Yeah.
And he used to go, like, his wife was so funny, and like he would just go to the shed and just like go right in the shed.
Wow.
And then would like come up with all like this like gangster stuff. And I'm sure he's lived this life before, but now he's a family man. It's like fatherhood.
Yeah.
And so it's like you are exercising those demons, and like you're not doing everything that you see on the screen or on the page, obviously.
Yeah, it's really interesting, you know, putting together these Masters of Horror dinners that we've done in the past, and hopefully we'll do some more in the future. The people within the genre I know are really sweet, wonderful people. And I think what binds us is the fact that we're all outsiders.
And a little misunderstood, I think, by the rest of Hollywood.
Greatly misunderstood and disrespected.
Well, it's funny because I feel like film people in general are like the weird kid in school.
Yes.
But then when you get all the weird kids together, you're still going to find like a group of them that you still think, oh, they're even weirder than we are. And I feel like that's the horror guys.
That's us.
And so it's like, oh yeah, we're all weird, but I don't know about those guys.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so nice, typically.
Yeah, being an outsider. And that's why there are horror conventions and there aren't Western conventions or romantic comedy conventions. You know, the people who tell horrific stories are exercising their demons, but they're also playing tag with their fears in a really safe way.
That's a really good way to put it. And actually, I never even thought about that there are horror conventions, but like you don't. And you get sci-fi kind of dips itself in there a little bit. They commingle.
Yeah.
They're like cousins, I would say.
Yeah, kissing cousins.
Yeah, kissing cousins. Oh, no one ever uses that phrase. I love that phrase.
Yeah, well, it was an Elvis Presley movie.
But yeah, there's no like Westerns or rom-coms because that seemed as like a little bit more normal, I guess I would say.
Well, yeah, you're binding together outsiders with their shared love of a genre that is disrespected. Because people, you know, who are bothered by horror movies, that's fine. Let them be. Just don't let them take them away from everybody else who's not, because I find them very therapeutic as well as entertaining.
Oh, I do too. Do you think that adapting original material for like horror or sci-fi is kind of easier than adapting it for like dramatic or like?
You know, I don't, because I think good horror or sci-fi still, first and foremost, has to be good drama. I think it's a lot harder to do good horror. You know, it's easy to do a splatter movie.
Yeah.
It's easy to do a slasher. You know, the demands, the dramatic and dramaturgical demands for a slasher movie are not as high as something like Talk to Me or The Exorcist or the Stephen King stories or the like, because the characters have to be rich and interesting and intricate. The plot lines have to take you someplace unexpected and surprising, but you also have to build and release tension and suspense on top of that.
Yeah, and then also I find that horror and science fiction as a genre, specifically science fiction, but I think horror as well, they're always commentaries on like what's going on in the world today, where I feel like as the other genres of movies like dramas and westerns, like we don't get so much commentary.
Yeah, they're just straight ahead storytelling where we're working in metaphor.
Yeah, I really always appreciate that, especially just, I mean, like my favorite movies are genre films. That's what I love. That's what I eat. I live. I breathe it.
Yeah, you could live at the New Beverly Theater. Right?
I basically do. I'm like there. I need a blanket. I need a pillow. So when it comes to adaptations, is there something that like you wish that you could adapt?
Well, I really wanted to do Gerald's Game. You know, the Stephen King novel.
Yeah.
And for years, people thought it was unfilmable, and I figured out a way I could do it. And there was a period of time where Stephen King wanted to direct it, and I would produce it.
Wow.
And then he decided not to direct after his accident.
Yeah.
But Mike Flanagan got it and did a great job of it. But that was something that I felt like it would have been a real challenge, but I knew how to do it. And I would love to have done that.
How would you have done it?
Well, you know, basically it's 90 minutes of a woman handcuffed naked to a bed.
Yeah.
I'd put her in underwear.
That's the first step. Get the correct rating.
But I mean, just make it kind of what Flanagan did, but just keep it in that room.
Yeah.
Almost like a play, but using every cinematic technique you could, every trick of the camera that would not feel masturbatory, but keep it tight and claustrophobic and painful. And, you know, what's outside, you hear wolves outside and the fear of that invasion. But to be as, you know, I experimented with writing The Bullet. so much of that is internalized that rather than have narration, which is the cheap way out of getting the internal outside, I actually had his alter ego in the back seat of the car.
Yeah.
So they would have conversations, the character and the same character.
Which is kind of the internal conversation that someone's having when they're writing a book almost.
Exactly. So that was an experience that I tried. The movie did not do well at all, but I think the technique worked to make something internal external. And this is everything she's under is external. And there's not a lot of thoughts other than how the fuck am I going to get out of this terrible situation with my dead husband on top of me.
Yeah.
And it just would have been a hothouse movie.
Yeah, exactly. Are there things that you would have done differently than how Flanagan did them?
I didn't get that.
Well, actually, of course, you would have done things differently because it would have been two different people adapting material, and I don't think anyone
even if it was the same script.
Even if it was the exact same script, it would have been different.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's also a book, a novel that I wrote called Salome. That's a Hollywood desert noir murder mystery.
Yeah.
Not a horror movie, though the elements become somewhat horrific. That's something I hope to do one day, but right now modern noir is not popular.
Unfortunately, because noir is like one of my other favorite genres.
Same here.
It's like, I think it's some of the best storytelling, and I also just think it's...
John Dahl is one of the great artists of modern noir.
Yeah. And also, I love LA noir also because
me too.
Yeah, like, I think that's like my favorite. Well, I grew up in the city.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's my city. And so it's like, I want to watch my city and like the noir. And there's a romantic aspect of that to me.
Oh, it's so great. I mean, James Ellroy is such a king of that. And LA Confidential is a masterpiece. And Chinatown, they're masterpieces of LA noir.
And I also love it because I feel like LA noir really involves the real history of LA inside of it and then uses LA as a character. And I like that about noir, is that it uses the city and the setting as characters.
Absolutely. And there's a lot less character in this city as it ages.
Isn't that weird? You would think that like a fine wine, the city
but
would...
it's getting torn down to be replaced with high-rise and modern crap.
It's sad. Like, my dad grew up in the South Bay. And when I go visit the South Bay now, it's like all the little tiny beach houses that like I loved growing up, they're all gone. And it's just like these big boxes. And I think... this is like sad. It's like the culture, like Hermosa Beach is still small.
Yeah.
But it's getting to the point where it's not going to be anymore, which is sad to me.
And it's become Party Beach. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has become Party Beach. I mean, well, you have Dockweiler. It's like the one place you can have an open fire on the beach in LA. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be Party Beach.
But talking about LA noir, the amazing thing about Chinatown, it's one of the most literate movies ever made, but it's not based on a book.
Yeah, that's interesting. But it is built on the whole Owens Valley water true history of LA.
Right.
So I guess you're not really adapting a book, but are you adapting newspaper? Like, is newspaper technically literary material?
I don't know. To come up with, to come up with the idea in the first place of a movie about the mystery behind water and how it's being served to a community is like the most boring idea you could come up with.
It's all Chinatown.
But it's just so good in every respect and so literate and literary, but in the most complimentary sense.
Do you think that, because nowadays we also have a lot of movies that are not just adapted from books or literature, I guess. Like, we have stuff that's adapted from video games, which I think can be very literary. A video game, because it's a long form storytelling that you're kind of going through. But do you think like the kind of source material also affects the process? Maybe.
I'm not a gamer, and so I've not gone to many of the video game movies. I've seen a handful of them, and it's not for me.
Yeah.
But whatever the source, storytelling is storytelling.
Yeah.
An adaptation, you're channeling that medium into the film medium.
Yeah.
So wherever a good story comes from, if you can adapt it into a good movie, more power to you.
Do you ever think there are movies that are like better than the original source material?
There have been. I think the Clint Eastwood movie that he directed from the book. Mystic River.
Okay.
Dennis Lehane's novel is fantastic.
Yeah.
I've never seen an adaptation that so captured the atmosphere of a novel as Clint Eastwood did with Mystic River. I think that it's as good as the book and maybe a little better because, I mean, Amy Ryan's performance in that, Kevin Bacon, everybody in it is so good. But there's this palpable level of dread that it's something I've never seen from a Clint Eastwood directed movie before or since that carries all the way through that movie. And it's that dread that originated in the movie, in the book.
In the book,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting also because, like, for example, I love Ken Russell. And so Ken Russell, he adapts very musically. Like, he has all these, like, musical adaptations. And he's doing, like with Mahler, for example, he's telling the story of Mahler, but
he was the worst interview I ever had.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Pause. Okay, wait. Tell me about this. I have to know.
Well, it was, they were showing one of his movies. I think it was The Devils at the Cinematheque.
That's the one movie I haven't seen yet.
Oh,
I have it, but I'm waiting. I'm waiting because it's like one of my last ones to see.
It's amazing. It's really fantastic. And so I had heard how hard he was on interviewers.
Yeah.
And I was asked to do the Q&A, and we were emailing together. And I said, "Now, I know that you're not a big fan of interviews." I think his wife, Lacey Tribble, was really the one corresponding with me because, I had sent my book to him to read because he wanted to do an episode of Masters of Horror, and he'd written a script that really was not suitable for what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so I offered to either help or write for him or whatever, and sent him my novel as an example of my work. And suddenly very enthusiastic about it, which was humbling and wonderful for me as a writer to get that from somebody I respected so much. So we did this Q&A at the Arrow, and I asked him one question, and he went off and was incredibly mean-spirited.
I've heard that's like how he is.
That's how he does. And so after that answer, I said, "Okay, questions from the audience."
Oh my God. Let's turn it over so he can yell at one of you instead.
Yeah, exactly. It worked out really well that way.
It's funny because I'm glad that I'll never meet him because I respect him so much as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I feel like if I met him, I could only be disappointed.
Meeting your heroes.
Yeah,
Usually it's good.
Usually I've had the chance to meet a lot of really cool people. Like you, Mick.
Oh, yeah. Top of the list, right?
Well, yeah, with my love for critters too, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've had the chance to meet like a lot of really cool people. And there are some people that like you meet and like it's like, wow, this is so great. But like I really want to meet Brad Dourif.
Oh,
but like I'm terrified to meet Brad Dourif. One day I will, but I don't know if like you're a huge Star Trek fan. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But Mark Alimo, who plays Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, I saw him at Thanksgiving at the grocery store. And he's out of makeup, and I recognized him. I started freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, it's Gul Dukat. It's like he's following me around the store. Like, what do I do? And I didn't say hello to him. But
You didn't?
No, it was Thanksgiving. I didn't want to he was like with someone. I didn't want to disturb him.
People, mostly, I think people appreciate when you recognize them, especially if you tell them you like something obscure that they were in.
It's so funny. My brother sees him at the thrift store and he wears these like sparkly shoes. And I was like, oh my God, he's wearing the sparkly shoes. Like I saw him. But yeah, there's some people it's like, it's weird picks that like I would never approach, but like, I guess he's one of them. But
Well, I'd met Ken Russell. He came to one of our Masters of Horror dinners.
Yeah.
And he was silent and very nice and sort of like a potentate that everyone was paying homage
Yeah.
to. That was my Ken Russell interview experience. One question.
Well, I'm glad that I did. What question was it? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but it was an introductory
You blocked
question.
it out. You blocked it out. You're like, I don't want to know.
It's gone. Yeah. But it was just a very standard introductory kind of question to start things rolling. And he did.
Yeah,
and
he started.
I let the ball be handed off.
It's funny though, because I find that he adapts very musically. And like I've watched a bunch of his stuff. Like he's done stories about all sorts of people, dancers, sculptors, composers. He mostly does composers, but he's done sculptors and dancers as well. He did a thing on Isadora Duncan for the BBC, and he did the Savage Messiah with that. But I I find it interesting. He's adapting someone's life story, but then also I find that he's adapting the musical, like the album also.
Yeah.
Like with Tommy, it's like he is adapting an album. And so
And I
feel,
love Tommy.
I love Tommy. Sure plays a mean pinball.
No kidding.
Deaf, dumb, and blind. It's like that. That's actually
I
my
loved
first,
the album before the movie.
Yeah. And it was funny. I saw that movie. I think I was like 12, maybe.
Yeah.
I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. So maybe younger. I don't know.
It's so weird to have Anne Margaret in it.
Yeah. And that's like my first Ken Russell movie I ever saw.
Really?
3rd grade. So thanks, Dad. It was a good one, but I thought everyone knew like Deaf, Dumb, and Blind sure plays mean pinball. And
Oh, that
of course,
was a huge hit
Of course,
song.
no one did at my age. Though.
Of course
I
not.
also thought the Violent Femmes were like the biggest band ever. And like none of my friends knew who they were.
Well, you're 27, right?
Yeah, now I am, yeah.
Yeah.
But back then I wasn't.
But yeah, back when you're 12,
Back
it
when you're
wasn't
12.
a hit.
No, it was not a hit for sure. But I think it's interesting though. It's like to adapt something like actually literary versus to adapt something that's musical, because as you said, like literature is internal. And I
Yeah.
wonder, like, is music internal too, or is it external?
Well,
or-
music is, I would say it is externalizing what's inside, because it's all about expressing passions.
Yeah.
You know, it's emotive even more than storytelling, because it comes from a place that's felt rather than told.
That's true. So it's a feeling rather than like a known entity.
Yeah,
You can,
yeah.
and especially classical music, I suppose. I mean, there are like lyrics to some classical pieces, obviously like operas and
Well, an opera is telling a story in a totally different way.
completely different. And I always like remember that like people actually used to speak all those languages.
Yeah.
So when you go to the opera, you actually knew what was happening.
Oh, that's Italian. Wait, that's
French.
French.
That's they're speaking in English now. But I guess I don't know. Some of my favorite things though, like I don't know if you've ever seen Let the Right One In.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So
both versions.
have you?
yeah.
Well,
And
don't
I
even
read the book first.
don't even bring Let Me In into this conversation.
Yeah,
I had to
sorry.
wash my eyes after I saw it. Sorry guys, but
And I'd read the book first.
yeah, and I hadn't read the book first. I remember Apple used to have these like Apple trailers, and I used to, when I was younger, I used to click on every single one, and I would watch every single trailer.
Yeah.
And I remember I saw the trailer for Let the Right One In, and I told my dad we have to go see it. And so he drove me. We were living in Ojai, and he drove me all the way to LA to go see it with me.
Nice.
It was such a great experience.
And worth it.
And worth it. And it became one of my favorite movies. I was probably in like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, maybe,
Wow.
I think, when it came out. And it was such a great experience. And then I read the book. And I was shocked at like how he adapted it, because it was like my first experience of like, here's an author adapting their own work, and how he hid things in the background. Like the teacher's talking about something, or something's on the radio, and it's like that's a whole chapter in the book, but it's
Right.
just like barely on the radio.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so fascinating. Like you can really encode your own book.
Yeah, you have to learn brevity when you're making a movie,
Yeah.
and you can be expansive when you're writing a book.
Yeah.
And it's really great when an author understands the difference between media.
Yeah.
And somebody like him, somebody like King, somebody like Parker, the people that I've worked with and known, they know the difference. Just like, and this is, a famous thing that Stephen King has said, when people say, how do you feel about so-and-so fucking up your book? He said, the book's right here on the shelf.
The book still
The movie
exists.
didn't change the book at all.
Thank God
Might
for
have been a
that.
shitty movie, but it didn't ruin my book.
Well, it's funny, like something like Altered States, the book is completely different from the movie.
Yeah, and both are great.
And both are great. Like I remember I watched the movie for a Gnosticism class where we were doing like a comparison with text, and then I read the book like thinking, oh, there must be like all these religious things like in the book. No, it's just like 2 long chapters of like this and that, and it's very technical.
One of the things I love is that a novelist who is a capable screenwriter as well, and Paddy Chayefsky was a playwright before he was a novelist or screenwriter, but when they adapt their own material, they have the luxury of changing whatever they want.
Exactly. They can
You
just
can
do
get
whatever.
a new idea after you wrote your book and go, you know what, the movie, we can do this.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
love how visual. And then also, apparently he and Ken Russell did not have a good collaboration on that. in the slightest, which
No,
does not
not
surprise
at
me,
all.
apparently. But
They were big fights, and,
you have
they were both big personalities.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Two titans in the industry. And then you have something like Rollerball, where it's a really good collaboration, apparently, with Jewison and the author, which was excellent. Like, I guess Jewison came up with all of the stuff for the game and like how that
great.
worked. So
Yeah.
that was excellent. But I guess it really depends.
When you're able to work together with somebody, and I've adapted my own literary material stuff.
There's
there
my
we
timer.
go.
There
We're
we
done.
go. We're done. You can finish your thought if you'd like, though, Mick.
No, I was just saying that I've adapted my own literary material, and I've been able to, like my short story Chocolate was the basis for my first Masters of Horror episode that I directed. And the short story stops at the halfway point, and the screenplay continues beyond that.
Oh, that's great because you were able to have more.
Yeah, it's my own story. I can do whatever the fuck I want with it. Yeah.
You sure can. So that is all the time that we have for today. But Mick, is there any final thought that you would like to tell the audience?
Well, as far as between books and movies, consume both.
Yeah.
It's really good for you.
And you can love both, even if they're completely different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of people, especially today, are only into visual media, and there's a lot to be gleaned from reading.
Yeah. And actually using your eyeballs and a piece of paper.
Yes,
Not just like an e-reader or on the computer.
Not just on your
Go to Barnes & Noble. Go to your local library, actually.
That's right. And pick up my books.
Yeah, exactly. You should.
Amazon.
Okay, we're going to go to Amazon, not the local library, I guess, but...
Well, yeah, small press.
That's it for today. Thank you so much to my birthday buddy, Mick Garris.
Thank you, Gala.
So you can find Mick on Instagram or Twitter at Mick Garris PM, or you can catch him on the Post Mortem Podcast on Dread Central. I'm Gala Avery, and this has been The Gala Show. The Gala Show is brought to you by the Video Archives Podcast Network. This episode was executive produced by Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avery, and produced by Gala Avery. Music composed by Andy Milburn. As always, I'm your host, Gala Avery. Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.